In the weeks that followed, Willow Ridge began to transform. It wasn't an overnight change, of course. Old habits die hard. But the shift was undeniable. The once oppressive atmosphere gave way to something lighter, warmer. Neighbors who had spent years avoiding each other now exchanged smiles and small talk over fences. Kids played freely in the streets again, their laughter echoing through the cul-de-sacs. Even the gardens seemed brighter, as if the plants themselves were relieved to be free from Karen's rigid rules. The new HOA board worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. Instead of focusing on nitpicky regulations, they prioritized what really mattered, creating a safe, welcoming environment for everyone. They organized community events, a spring picnic, a summer movie night under the stars, and even a Halloween costume contest that brought out families in droves. These gatherings weren't just about fun. They were about reconnecting people, reminding them that we were more than just houses and lawns. We were a neighborhood. For Jake, life returned to normal, or at least the kind of normal he deserved. Connor no longer bullied him, and while the two boys weren't exactly friends, they'd managed to coexist peacefully. One afternoon, I watched as Jake rode his bike down the street, weaving between chalk drawings and jump ropes without a care in the world. His scraped knees had healed, but more importantly, so had his spirit. Seeing him happy again made every sleepless night, every tense confrontation, worth it. Still, the aftermath of Karen's downfall weighed on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Jake was asleep, I found myself replaying everything in my mind. Had I gone too far? Manipulated people, played into rumors and fears to get what I wanted. Part of me wondered if exposing Karen's secrets had been necessary, or if there had been another way to make things right. One evening, as I sat on the porch sipping tea, Linda stopped by. She'd become a regular visitor since the scandal, often dropping off homemade cookies or just checking in. "You look like you've got something on your mind," she said, settling into the chair beside me. I hesitated, then admitted, "I keep thinking about Karen, about whether I did the right thing." Linda sighed, her expression thoughtful. "Karen brought this on herself," she said firmly. "But that doesn't mean you didn't feel conflicted about it. Standing up for what's right isn't always clean or easy. It's messy. And sometimes it forces us to do things we wouldn't normally do." Her words stayed with me long after she left. She was right, of course. Fighting for justice wasn't about perfection, it was about balance. Yes, I had used strategy and psychology to take Karen down, but in doing so, I had also given my neighbors a chance to reclaim their voices. That realization helped ease some of the guilt gnawing at me. As the months passed, Karen faded further into the background. Her house went up for sale, though no one seemed interested in buying it. Rumors circulated that her husband had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Some people felt sorry for her, while others insisted she got exactly what she deserved. Personally, I tried not to dwell on it. What mattered most was that Willow Ridge was moving forward and thriving. One day, as I walked Jake to school, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Dad," he said, tugging at my sleeve, "why did Mrs. Harper quit being the HOA boss?" I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Because sometimes people realize they need to step aside so others can lead." He nodded thoughtfully, accepting my answer without pressing further. Watching him skip ahead, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the victory we'd achieved, but for the lessons it had taught us both. Life in Willow Ridge wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. It all began on what seemed like a perfectly ordinary morning. The kind of morning where the world feels soft and gentle, untouched by the chaos that often lurks beneath the surface. I was sitting on our porch, sipping my coffee, watching the sun peek through the trees. It was one of those moments that make you feel grateful for life's little blessings. My son, Jake, was out front, riding his bike with the carefree joy only a 9-year-old can possess. His laughter floated in the air, blending with the chirping birds and rustling leaves. For a moment, I thought, this is it. This is the peaceful life we've been dreaming of. But peace, as I learned that day, is fragile. I didn't notice anything unusual at first. Jake was pedaling down the cul-de-sac, his sneakers pushing against the pedals with determination. Then, out of nowhere, a group of kids appeared. At the center of them was Connor, Karen's son. If Karen was the queen of the neighborhood, then Connor was her miniature clone, cocky, entitled, and always looking for trouble. He strutted around like he owned the place, probably because his mom ran the homeowners association, HOA, with an iron fist. At first, it seemed harmless enough. The kids were laughing, teasing each other in that way kids sometimes do. But then things took a turn. Connor stepped into the street, blocking Jake's path. "Get out of here," he shouted, his voice sharp and mean. Jake tried to steer around him, but Connor wasn't done. With a smirk, he stuck out his foot, tripping Jake off his bike. The sound of metal clattering against pavement made my stomach drop. I jumped up from my chair, coffee forgotten, and rushed toward them. By the time I got there, Jake was already scrambling to his feet, tears streaming down his face. His knees were scraped, and his hands trembled as he grabbed his bike. Connor stood a few feet away, laughing along with his friends. "Stay off our street, loser," he taunted before giving the bike a hard kick, sending it skittering into the gutter. My heart clenched. I wanted to march over and give Connor a piece of my mind, but I stopped myself. Yelling wouldn't solve anything, not yet anyway. Instead, I knelt beside Jake, brushing dirt off his scraped knees. "You okay, buddy?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the anger bubbling inside me. He nodded, though his lips quivered. "I'm fine," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. But I knew better. This wasn't just about a scraped knee or a dented bike. It was about feeling powerless, about being bullied simply because someone thought they were better than you. Later that afternoon, I decided to confront Karen. After all, she was the one who preached about community values at every HOA meeting. Surely, she'd want to address this kind of behavior. When I knocked on her door, she answered with a smug smile, her oversized sunglasses perched on top of her head. Before I could say a word, she cut me off. "Oh, you must be Jake's dad," she said, her tone dripping with superiority. "Look, boys will be boys. Maybe your son should learn to toughen up." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did she really think this was acceptable? Was she so blind to her own son's cruelty? I bit back my frustration, forcing myself to stay calm. "This isn't about toughness," I replied, my voice low but firm. "It's about respect. And safety. What if a car had been coming? Do you think that's something we should dismiss as boys being boys?" Karen rolled her eyes, clearly uninterested. "If you're looking for someone to blame, maybe start with yourself. Teach your kid to keep up." Her dismissive attitude only fueled my resolve. She might have thought she was untouchable, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. Little did she realize, I wasn't just another suburban dad trying to keep the peace. No, I had skills, experience, and secrets that could shake this entire neighborhood to its core. And if Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. The next morning, I woke up with a clear plan in mind. Karen might think she was untouchable, but I knew better. People like her thrive on control, on making others feel small so they can feel big. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. My son deserved better, and so did the rest of the neighborhood. After dropping Jake off at school, I headed straight to the local coffee shop. It wasn't just about caffeine. It was about gathering intel. You'd be surprised how much people will say when they're sipping their lattes and chatting casually. I struck up conversations with neighbors I barely knew, asking them how things were going in the community. At first, they were hesitant. Karen's influence loomed large. But once I mentioned Jake's incident, the floodgates opened. "Oh, that kid Connor is trouble," one woman said, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "He's always causing problems, but no one says anything because of his mom. Another neighbor chimed in, lowering her voice. Karen runs this place like it's her own personal kingdom. If you cross her, good luck getting anything approved. She'll nitpick your mailbox color or fine you for having a single dandelion in your yard. Their stories painted a picture of a neighborhood living under a silent dictatorship. Rules weren't there to keep things nice. They were weapons used to punish anyone who dared step out of line. And while some people resented it, most were too scared to speak up. That's when I realized I wasn't just fighting for Jake anymore. This was about standing up for everyone who felt powerless against Karen's reign. Later that evening, I sat down and drafted a letter, a polite but firm response to Karen's accusations. In it, I outlined exactly what had happened between Jake and Connor, complete with dates, times, and witnesses. I also included a list of questions. Why hadn't the HOA addressed bullying behavior before? What measures were in place to ensure kids could play safely in their own neighborhood? And finally, I requested a formal apology, not just from Connor, but from Karen herself. The next day, I hand-delivered the letter to Karen's doorstep. Her jaw tightened as she read it, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against the paper. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," she snapped, shoving the letter back at me. "This isn't worth my time." But I wasn't done yet. The following week, I attended my first ever HOA meeting. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe a bunch of stuffy adults arguing over fence heights. But I knew I had to try. As I walked into the community center, I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Some people nodded politely. Others whispered behind their hands. Karen sat at the front of the room, looking every bit the queen bee she fancied herself to be. When it came time for public comments, I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I'd like to address an issue that affects all of us," I began, scanning the room. Safety. Specifically, the safety of our children. Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Are you referring to something in particular?" "Yes," I replied, locking eyes with her. "My son was deliberately knocked off his bike by another child last week. Instead of addressing the problem, certain parents have chosen to excuse such behavior, or worse, ignore it altogether." The room fell silent. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged nervous glances. Karen tried to brush it off, waving her hand dismissively. "Kids' roughhouse. It's part of growing up." "That may be true," I countered, "but when one child intentionally harms another and faces no consequences, it sends a message. It tells them it's okay to act without empathy or accountability. Is that really the kind of community we want to live in?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For the first time, Karen looked unsure of herself. Her polished exterior cracked ever so slightly, revealing a flicker of doubt beneath. I pressed on, knowing I had their attention now. "We moved here because Willow Ridge promised a safe, welcoming environment for families. But if incidents like this continue unchecked, that promise rings hollow." By the time I finished speaking, the room buzzed with quiet conversation. People nodded along, some even applauding softly. Karen quickly adjourned the meeting, her cheeks flushed with anger, or maybe embarrassment. As I left the room, several neighbors approached me, thanking me for speaking up. One man even patted me on the back and said someone needed to say it. That night, as I tucked Jake into bed, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in days. Maybe taking on Karen wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't alone anymore. The tide was starting to turn, and for the first time, I believed we might actually win. The days after the HOA meeting felt like a chess game. Karen wasn't about to back down, and neither was I. She struck first, of course, because that's what people like her do when they feel cornered. A crisp white envelope appeared on my doorstep the very next morning, stamped with the official HOA logo. Inside was a list of violations so absurd it almost made me laugh. Unauthorized shrubbery height, it read. Improper placement of trash bins. There was even a citation for excessive noise stemming from Jake playing video games in our living room after 8 p.m. Each violation carried a fine. adding up to an amount that would make anyone's wallet cry. It was petty, ridiculous, and clearly designed to intimidate. But instead of getting angry, I smiled. This was exactly what I wanted. You see, I knew how to play this game. Years of working in high-pressure situations had taught me one thing: patience. While Karen fired off her ridiculous fines, I started digging deeper into her world. Late at night, after Jake went to bed, I pored over public records, financial reports, and old neighborhood newsletters. Slowly but surely, cracks began to show in Karen's perfect facade. It turned out Karen wasn't just strict, she was sloppy. Receipts showed she used HOA funds to pay for personal vacations. Emails revealed shady deals with contractors who charged exorbitant fees for subpar work. And then there were the rumors, whispers among neighbors about favoritism, threats, and even outright lies. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't just running the HOA, she was exploiting it. But exposing her wouldn't be easy. People in Willow Ridge were scared of her, and rightly so. No one wanted to risk becoming her next target. So I decided to take a different approach, one that played directly to human nature. You see, people love a good mystery, especially when it involves someone they already distrust. One evening, I casually mentioned to a few neighbors that I used to work in government contracting. I didn't elaborate, letting the phrase hang in the air like smoke. Their eyes widened, curiosity sparking instantly. Government contracting. One woman asked, leaning closer, "What does that mean exactly?" I shrugged, keeping my tone light but mysterious. "Let's just say I've dealt with some complicated situations." By the end of the week, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with speculation. Some thought I was a spy. Others assumed I worked for the FBI or CIA. Even Karen heard the rumors, though she tried to brush them off as nonsense. Still, I could tell she was rattled. Her usual confident stride faltered when she passed me in the driveway, and her sharp remarks during HOA meetings lacked their usual bite. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Karen hosted her weekly book club, a gathering of her closest allies. At her house, I made sure to attend, bringing along a plate of homemade brownies, a peace offering, or so it seemed. As the women sipped wine and nibbled on snacks, I casually brought up the topic of transparency in neighborhood leadership. "It's funny," I said, swirling my glass. "People think Willow Ridge is so perfect, but every community has its secrets. The question is, how far are we willing to go to protect them?" The room fell silent. Karen's knuckles whitened as she gripped her wine glass. "What are you implying?" she demanded, her voice sharper than usual. "Nothing yet," I replied smoothly, flashing her a knowing smile. "But maybe we all have things we'd rather not come to light." Karen's face flushed red, and for the first time, she looked unsure of herself. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty wavering under the weight of unanswered questions. By the time dessert rolled around, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The women whispered behind their hands, casting nervous glances at Karen. Even her most loyal supporters seemed to doubt her now. As I left her house that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Karen's empire was built on fear and control, but fear only works when people don't know any better. Now, thanks to a few carefully planted seeds, the foundation was starting to crack. All I had to do was wait and watch as the truth slowly came to light. The tension in Willow Ridge was palpable. It wasn't just about me and Karen anymore. Everyone could feel the storm brewing. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now nodded sympathetically when they saw me. Some even stopped to chat, sharing their own grievances about Karen's iron-fisted rule. She fined me for having a bird feeder, one man confessed, said it attracted squirrels and lowered property values. Another neighbor admitted she'd been too afraid to repaint her front door because Karen had rejected her color choice 3 times. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to be unraveling. Her usual polished demeanor cracked under the weight of mounting scrutiny. She started sending out emails late at night, filled with defensive justifications for every decision she'd ever made. One email, titled Clarification on Recent Rumors, went on for pages, accusing unnamed residents of spreading lies and undermining the HOA's integrity. But instead of quelling the unrest, her words only fueled more suspicion. Then came the whistleblower, a woman named Linda who had served alongside Karen on the HOA board. I didn't approach her directly. She came to me. One afternoon, as I was mowing the lawn, she appeared at my gate, clutching a folder stuffed with documents. "I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her," Linda said, her voice trembling. But I couldn't do it alone. Inside the folder were receipts, emails, and meeting minutes that painted a damning picture. Karen had embezzled thousands from the HOA treasury, using the money to fund luxury vacations and spa treatments. She pressured contractors into inflating their bids, pocketing the difference. And perhaps worst of all, she'd routinely silenced anyone who dared challenge her authority, threatening fines or even legal action if they didn't comply. Armed with this evidence, I knew it was time to strike. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week, and attendance was mandatory for all board members. I spent hours preparing, organizing Linda's documents into a clear, undeniable narrative. By the time the meeting rolled around, I felt ready, not just to confront Karen, but to expose her for who she truly was. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as neighbors filed in, clutching their notebooks and pens. Karen sat at the head of the table, her usual air of superiority replaced by thinly veiled anxiety. When it came time for public comments, I stood up, holding the folder in one hand. "I'd like to address an issue that affects us all," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Transparency, or rather, the lack of it, within our HOA leadership." Karen stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "Are you accusing someone of wrongdoing?" she asked, her tone icy. "Not accusing," I replied. "Proving." With that, I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence. Each document told a story: fake invoices, unauthorized withdrawals, emails detailing bribes and threats. Gasps rippled through the room as neighbors leaned forward, their faces pale with shock. Karen tried to interrupt, but her protests were drowned out by angry murmurs. "This is outrageous," she shouted, slamming her hands on the table. "These are lies." "They're not lies," Linda interjected, standing beside me. "I helped cover them up for years, but no more. We deserve better than this." Chaos erupted. People shouted questions, demanding answers. Karen looked like a cornered animal, her composure crumbling completely. As the crowd pressed in, someone called for her resignation. The chant grew louder, echoing off the walls. "Resign. Resign." Finally, Karen collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she looked small, human, but it wasn't over yet. Not quite. As the meeting adjourned, I turned to leave, feeling a mix of triumph and exhaustion. The battle was won, but rebuilding trust would take time. Still, as I walked home under the fading light of day, I allowed myself a small smile. Willow Ridge was finally free. And so was Jake. The fallout from the HOA meeting was immediate and chaotic. Word spread like wildfire through Willow Ridge, with neighbors buzzing about Karen's downfall. Some were shocked, others outraged, but most felt a strange sense of relief, as if a dark cloud that had been hanging over the neighborhood for years had finally lifted. People who once avoided confrontation now openly shared their frustrations. It was as though exposing Karen's secrets had given everyone permission to speak freely. Karen, on the other hand, was a wreck. She stopped attending meetings altogether, retreating into her house like a wounded animal. Her perfectly manicured lawn began to show signs of neglect. Brown patches where grass should have been green, weeds creeping up along the edges. Even Connor seemed quieter, no longer strutting around the cul-de-sac like he owned it. For the first time in years, Willow Ridge felt peaceful. But I wasn't ready to let Karen off the hook just yet. The evidence we'd uncovered was enough to ruin her reputation, and maybe even land her in legal trouble. But there was one last piece of the puzzle I wanted to address: the bullying. What happened to Jake wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, enabled by Karen's toxic leadership. If we were going to truly heal this community, we needed to confront that head-on. At the next HOA meeting, held without Karen's presence, I stood up to speak. We've taken a big step toward accountability. I began, looking around the room at familiar faces. But rebuilding trust isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating a better future. I paused, letting my words sink in. When my son was bullied, I didn't just see a child being cruel. I saw a reflection of the environment we've allowed to exist here. An environment where fear and control overshadow kindness and respect. We can't change what happened, but we can decide how we move forward. I suggested forming a new committee focused on fostering a positive community culture, organizing events, encouraging neighborly connections, and addressing conflicts before they escalated. To my surprise, the idea was met with overwhelming support. Neighbors eagerly volunteered to help, including some who had previously stayed silent under Karen's rule. Still, there was one thing left unresolved: Karen herself. Though she had resigned from the board, she hadn't apologized or even acknowledged her role in everything. That changed during the annual block party, which marked a fresh start for Willow Ridge. The event was lively, filled with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue wafting through the air. Kids ran around playing tag, their giggles echoing down the streets. Midway through the party, Karen appeared, looking smaller somehow in her plain jeans and sweater. She walked hesitantly toward me, her eyes avoiding mine. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded, stepping aside so we could speak privately. For a moment, she just stood there, fidgeting with her hands. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry for everything." Her apology caught me off guard, not because I doubted its sincerity, but because it reminded me how much damage unchecked power could do. Karen wasn't inherently evil. She was someone who had lost sight of what really mattered. And while forgiveness wouldn't erase the past, it could pave the way for healing. As the sun set over Willow Ridge, casting golden light across the neighborhood, I realized something important. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about giving people a chance to do better. For themselves, and for the community they're a part of. Months later, Willow Ridge felt like a completely different place. The once tense atmosphere had given way to a sense of calm and connection. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, kids played outside without fear, and the streets were alive with the hum of community life. It wasn't perfect. No neighborhood ever is, but it was better. Kinder. More human. Jake seemed happier than he'd been in years. He made new friends at school, joined a local soccer team, and even started planting flowers in our front yard. Something Karen would have fined us for. Watching him thrive reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. This wasn't just about winning against Karen. It was about giving my son, and everyone else in Willow Ridge, a chance to live without fear or judgment. Still, there were moments when I wondered if people still thought about what had happened. Did they remember Karen's downfall, or had they moved on, burying the past like an uncomfortable memory? One Saturday morning, as I watered the garden, Mr. Peddle from across the street stopped by to chat. "Things are good now," he said with a smile, leaning against the fence. "Better than they've been in years. You know, we have you to thank for that." I shook my head, brushing off the compliment. Not just me. Everyone stepped up. I just gave them a push. He chuckled knowingly. "Maybe. But not everyone has the guts to stand up to someone like Karen. You did what most of us were too scared to do." His words stayed with me long after he left. Courage wasn't something I thought much about. I'd always seen myself as someone who simply did what needed to be done. But maybe standing up for your family, your neighbors, and your values took more bravery than I realized. And maybe that bravery could inspire others to do the same. Later that day, as Jake and I worked together in the yard, I noticed Mrs. Harper's house finally had a sold sign planted in the front lawn. A moving truck sat in the driveway, its back doors wide open. Workers carried boxes and furniture out of the house, loading them carefully into the vehicle. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Karen packing up her kitchen, her shoulders slumped with defeat. For a brief moment, I considered walking over, offering some kind of closure. But then I remembered Linda's advice. Sometimes, letting go is the best thing you can do, for yourself and for others. So instead, I turned away, focusing on Jake as he proudly showed me the flower bed he'd been working on. "Think these will bloom soon?" he asked, pointing to the tiny green shoots peeking through the soil. "They sure will," I replied, smiling. "With a little patience, anything can grow." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood, I reflected on how far we'd come. Karen's rain may have cast a shadow over Willow Ridge, but it hadn't broken us. Instead, it had forced us to confront our fears, stand up for what was right, and rediscover the strength of community. That night, as Jake drifted off to sleep, I sat on the porch, watching the stars twinkle above. Life here wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that we were building something real, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace.